Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, it is late summer, and I am already making plans for some of next year's guests. See, every Monday I get this email from Edelweiss. They do all the e-review copies of books for, upcoming titles and all. So the email on Mondays has a list of all the fiction and nonfiction books for which they have new e-review copies. So every week at lunchtime on Monday, I sit down, click through both of those, and I just look over the 100 or so books in each category, see if there's anything that sounds interesting for future episodes. And I've gotten a bunch of shows this year out of doing that. This week, two of my past guests showed up in the fiction section with releases coming this January and March. So I hit them up. They said yes, and I guess that means I'm going to keep doing this into 2025, huh? Wheels got to keep turning, I guess. Anyway, not a whole lot to tell you otherwise, just the summer doldrums. I'm getting run down by the whole season, and I've got a whole ton of work to do just to get ready for this fall. So I'm not going to bore you with any of that. Instead, let's get to the show. This week's guest is Mirana Comstock. She edited a phenomenal new book called The Algonquin Roundtable, 25 Years with the Legends Who Lunch, by Conrad Bercovici. It's published by Excelsior Editions imprint of SUNY Press, State University of New York. Actually, it is not a phenomenal new book because Conrad Bercovici died 10 years before I was born, but it is seeing print for the first time, so that makes it new. See, Mirana is Conrad's granddaughter, and there is a whole story as to how she came across the manuscript for this book, and much more of Conrad's writing as well as writing by other members of the family. And she'll get into that in our conversation. But I just have to tell you, Conrad is an amazing writer. His prose is phenomenal, clean and clear. His storytelling chops are fantastic. And he's got this reporter's eye that he brings to scenes and settings, and he melds that beautifully with this authorial voice. In the conversation, I say it's like melding the reporter and the columnist into one, and he really does that. Well, anyway, the book gets into the history of the Algonquin Roundtable, that hotel and restaurant in the theater district in New York City. But it digresses all over the place into these wonderful stories of writers and the theater and the lore of Hollywood and the labor movement and all the people who worked in the hotel and the other guy who bought it and originated it and then his successor. And Conrad brings the hotel, the restaurant, the habitués, everybody. He brings it all to life. But more than that, he evokes the whole era, this 30s into 50s world, mainly the interwar era. But reading this book, it just, it felt like an antidote to social media. I'll put it that way, and to the whole influencers and hot takes and all that stuff. To imagine this world of this restaurant and lounge where the great thinkers and writers and lawyers and scientists and everybody just hung out and chewed the fat. And, well, again, we compare it to Vienna cafe culture later on in the conversation, but it's a different world than we have now. And throughout the book, Conrad drops names, but you never get the sense that he's out to impress. really, you get the vibe that he knew everyone. He didn't just know them in passing. He got something, whether it was the biggest writers and actors in the world, or the bellboys and the waiters at the hotel. He was able to capture them all on the page. And this book really, it brings it all to us. Now, it comes up in the conversation. I will tell you, I'd never heard of Conrad Bercovici before receiving this book. I got a pitch from a publicist who's a longtime listener of the show. Thank you, Jesse. But I didn't know. And I was reading Mirana's introduction to the book and learned what high esteem Bercovici was held in by both critics and his peers. He was a big name writer with about 40 books on his shelf in America's, like I say, the interwar period and beyond. And we get into why his reputation faded as much as it did. But I just got to tell you, a writer this good should not be ignored. We need to go back and start kind of exploring this guy's prose, both for just the sheer quality of the writing and for the era he was writing about and the anti-fascist message he brought to the world. And anti-fascist in this case being directly anti-Nazi. Well, again, there's a whole story, and Mirana will get into that as we start talking. The Algonquin Roundtable, it's a wonderful book, and Mirana's doing a mitzvah, bringing his writing back for today's readers. And her introduction to the book it's illuminating, not just about Conrad's times, but about the family and what it was like for her growing up in this multi-generational household of bohemian artists. And I compare it to the Royal Tenenbaums a little bit, but it's something weirder and different than that. And I hope in her own work, Mirana starts to explore that, and we talk about what she plans to do with some of the other writing that she's come across as the remaining heir. So anyway, when I was headed up to Massachusetts last month for ReaderCon, I took a side trip over to Mirana's house so we could sit down, have a conversation about this book and her experience bringing it to life, and the other wonders that await us as we learn more about the Bercovici family. So go get the Algonquin Roundtable, 25 Years with the Legends Who Lunch. It's by Conrad Bercovici, Conrad with a K, edited and with an introduction by Mirana Comstock from Excelsior Editions, a SUNY Press. Now, as caveats go, there's some background noise. It was summer. We had the doors open, so you'll hear sprinklers, delivery trucks, dogs barking. Her dog comes meandering in, and we have a cute moment with him. Also, my main recorder had a problem. I did not realize until afterwards. I should have realized it when I saw the levels on her side, but I thought it was the air conditioning. So this is all done from the backup recorder, because you should always have a backup recorder going, guys. And the audio is just fine. Anyway, the other thing is, we use the term gypsy throughout the conversation because that's the term as Conrad used it. And he wrote about that world a lot. I'll just leave it at that, okay? Now here's Mirana's bio. Mirana Comstock is a screenwriter, poet, and musician who has recorded and performed in New York and the Boston area, where she now resides. She is currently adapting one of her grandfather's books as a miniseries. Here's Conrad's bio. There's a longer version at conradbercovici.com, but this is the one from the book. Conrad Bercovici was a celebrated author and journalist and friend of many leading 20th century figures, including John Reed, Charlie Chaplin, Ernest Hemingway, and Paul Robeson. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Mirana Comstock. So tell me about finding the manuscript, the story behind, how we bring the Algonquin Roundtable to life.
Well, it was kind of in the process of potentially moving from the house that I lived in and figuring out that everything couldn't come with me. Already 500 paintings were coming, but every single piece of paper that anybody in the family had ever written on couldn't come also, because everybody wrote. The painters wrote, the musicians wrote, everybody wrote also. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of a family story that I thought that our veins were blue because we all had ink in them. And so I figured it was time to go through the papers and see what was in there and what wasn't in there. And several years before, Anne Wilde, who was a student in Eastern European studies at Cornell, had discovered some of Grandpa's work in the library. The librarian at Cornell had pointed her in that direction. And she loved the work and ended up basically majoring in him. She passed away before she finished her thesis, but she got grants to go to France and Romania and retrace the family steps. She knew more about the family than I did. They visited with my mom. They filmed her at Free Acres, the single tax colony in New Jersey, actually, where they had summered when she was a child, and filmed her at her apartment in New York. And she had arranged at one point for papers to potentially go to Columbia. And I had spoken to the person at Columbia, but at the time, it just wasn't the right time to do it. I couldn't go through it. I didn't have the resources to do it. And I traced down the guy from Columbia who ended up at the New York Historical Society, but he had retired from there. And actually, I can announce this as a first on here.
Yeah.
The New York Historical Society has acquired Grandpa's papers as of a few weeks ago. They were all driven to New York in 12 plastic banker boxes that lived in the second bathroom here for a while until we could get them there. So I was preparing myself for the move, and also while I was doing this, remembering like these papers have to go somewhere and they shouldn't be coming around with me. My family produced so much writing and so much artwork, it becomes almost like family hoarding when you keep all of it, and there's no reason for me to have all of it. It's really better off for other people to experience it. So I started going through the papers, and Grandpa published literally hundreds of stories and articles during the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. He was still writing until he died in 61. And there's so much work there that it's hard for me to tell what's been published and what hasn't been published, because if there's hundreds of stories,
What's a draft versus what was?
It's really hard to know that, and it's also difficult to know what hasn't published and what hasn't been published. And you look up copyright laws, but some of the magazines held the copyrights, and some of them don't exist anymore. Some of them do, like Esquire. He had dozens of things in Esquire. And he was on the masthead along with Hemingway and Dreiser and Fitzgerald and stuff, because he was actually on that level at one point. But so I'm going through all the papers and trying to figure out what I should be saving, what I shouldn't, what's a duplicate copy of what. I've got like hundreds of little piles around the room with the same title on it. And it also allowed me to realize, because he was so prolific, that I at one point figured, maybe he didn't edit anything. Maybe it just came out like that.
Yeah.
But these were versions, there's handwritten things on them, which is one of the reasons that the Historical Society was interested in them. But the books I knew, because I knew there were 40 books, and I knew I had a copy of each of the books. So when I found, there's 3 books that I found that I know of so far. When I found the Algonquin book, it was the way it was bound with the big old metal prongs and all kinds of stuff. It was obviously a book and not a bunch of stories. And I knew it hadn't been published because I had all these books. I had to keep more careful track of that. So I found that one in a novel written in the 50s, which we may be turning into a television series. That's the next project. And there was also a series of articles that he wrote about some of the people he knew. And this was kind of amazing. People did an article about Chaplin, there's an article about Hemingway, there's an article about Modigliani, whose sketch of Grandpa is in the Modern Museum. There's stuff about Einstein, because he was on Prevent World War III publications with him and stuff. So there were a lot of stories. Some of the stories had been published before and some of them hadn't. But if you make a collection of them, it's a new copyright. So it seemed worthwhile. And that is actually what I went out first with as a proposal, because I thought the sort of the marquee brand names in there. Gee, an article about Hemingway, an article about Einstein, an article about T.E. Lawrence, an article about Chaplin. I thought this was going to be more of a draw. And as I was working on it, I found other ones too. I found one on Mahler when he was the conductor, and I found one on Edward G. Robinson, who was a native Romanian, same as Grandpa, and they knew each other. And I found all these other things to started getting bigger and bigger. And that's what I originally went out with. But when I talked to an agent in New York who suggested I go the academic route, and when I got in touch with SUNY, State University of New York, Richard Carlin, who's a senior editor there, was initially interested in the memoir stories, but then when he heard that there was an Algonquin book, he describes it as like hair on his back of his neck stood up. That's at the launch. That actually is what he said in the film making of it. That he was like, because they have a division, the Excelsior Editions division, and that division is New York and New York history.
Yeah. And so this book is very beyond just being the Algonquin.
Yeah.
This book is so New York. It's
completely New York. And at one point he was even interested in republishing Around the World in New York, one of Grandpa's books. So we decided that getting into ethnic neighborhoods and things and stuff like that was not where we wanted to go.
Yeah.
It's a little too sensitive in this time to go there. And so within a few days, once he'd read the book, he was interested in doing the book. And what was kind of cool about that, we talked about other people doing the foreword initially and all this kind of stuff. And then he asked me to do the foreword. And I'm not a book writer. I'm a published poet. I write lyrics. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm an advertising writer. I'm a screenwriter. I've written everything but books. It was almost like I left that for the family to do.
Right.
And there's a thing with books of not having guardrails or parameters that's really weird to me, because every other kind of writing I do,
sure.
Screenwriting is format central. Don't write more than 4 lines of action on that, otherwise they'll think you're trying to be the director. There's or the cinematographer. Poetry, you set up your own boundaries around. And I set up pretty strict ones that are, my voice. It's not like sing-songy or certain rhythm, but they're little things. I want interior rhymes at certain places and stuff like that. And obviously lyrics, music. So you have like guardrails around you for everything. For a book, it's like, do 10, 12 pages. What?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was like, how will I know when I'm done?
Yeah.
It was a strange floating, no parameters like thing, And how will I know I've said too much about him or not too much about me, or who cares about that story? And it was. I sweated it.
Yeah.
For sure. It wasn't like, she's this writer, she's always written. It was not what I was used to writing. And then he asked me to become the editor of the book also. And that was another tough thing, because I edit myself. I don't edit other people.
Sure.
And editing somebody else's voice who wrote this book like 70 years ago, you go like, well, would Grandpa have made that one sentence as paragraph into 3 separate sentences now? Or is that just me with what I would do? So it's editing within somebody else's voice. And I guess that's why Grandpa had an editor. People back in the day had their editor.
Yeah.
Who was the person.
That's still a case in publishing.
I'm sure, yeah. But I don't know, because I don't do this.
There's always stories when an editor jumps ship to another publishing house, all the authors go with them. That's the pivot as to what
I can see that, because getting inside their head and doing it the way you think is better, but the way they would think it was better, not the way you would think it was better.
Yeah.
Plus 70 years, plus it's your grandfather.
Sure.
And I'm sitting there going, why am I editing him? He's the person who had all the work done and all that kind of stuff. I've been knocking on these doors forever. I go out with Grandpa's book, and in 3 days he's got a publisher. It's kind of like, I haven't sold a script yet. It becomes like, so why am I the one editing him? He should be editing me if he was alive. And so there's all that sort of feelings in there. I found it really difficult, but obviously I did okay, because they put my name on the cover, which was they knew how to get me to do this, because that was my name with Grandpa, but I had to make it smaller.
Yeah, I see.
I was one of the few people probably involved in thinking, make my name smaller.
Yeah, just there, but it doesn't have to be dominant. But but I like the introduction. It flows, and it was a question I had as to how much editing was involved, because I don't know, what the raw material looked like.
The raw material looked good.
Yeah.
Looked good. That was one of the things I learned from looking through the papers, that Grandpa did edit. Yeah. His handwriting is all over a lot of those pages, because so that wasn't the answer. Like, he did all of this prolific, incredible amount of work while raising 4 children who could have been the easiest in the world, because they were all like independent and raised going to things like ethical culture school and things where you left when you felt like it, and you didn't teach them the alphabet because that would be too constricting for their brains. So that's what he raised. So, and 4 of them, and he was a foreign correspondent in Europe and in covering the Nazis and covering World War I and World War. He was at the Paris Peace Conference and stuff. So he was traveling all the time. And writing the books and the stories, and writing the articles, and raising. I still don't get it. But part of me thought maybe he didn't have to edit, but not true. It was handwriting all over.
There's a degree of the writer I think of in relation to him. Different region, same lifetime generally. Stefan Zweig, who was huge Austrian writer who just kept writing novellas, a couple of novels, biographies, memoirs, all this stuff. And you can't add up the dates and make it work. It's like, when did he stop?
I don't.
Even the end, like he was in exile in Brazil. He fled Europe, goes to New York, hates it there, moves to Brazil, doesn't have his library or anything with him, writes a 500-page autobiography, and then kills himself. And it's like, okay, I mean, the last part is terrible, but it's also how did you just come up with the whole autobiography in like 6 months? I don't. And it's so many different things, because I would open up a thing, and the things that haven't been produced, I kept copies of that I gave to Historical Society. But I'd open up like a section of the drawer, and there'd be like 50 plays. He had realities, because he was was alive during television. In fact, the week that he passed away in '61, he did At Your Beck and Call. It was a TV show that had like writers and things, and he was on with Norman Mailer and stuff like that. And he was the one getting the most questions, because Grandpa was just really charming. He was a really charming guy, and just totally born storyteller. He could sit down and tell you a story about anything. He'd be like, he'd just stop everything to listen to it. Which, when I was organizing the papers, like I said, was difficult, because anything I picked up, you could not put down. It just grabbed you. And a part of that, I think, is the journalist, the who, what, where, when. He puts you in there. Yeah. Anybody he describes, if they walk down the street, you would know them in a second. And it's just different ways of describing people. It's not cliche or anything. And it carries throughout the book.
It does.
In this one in particular, it's just... It feels like you are there, because, it's a reporter telling you this. A reporter / columnist, like you're getting an individual's perspective, but you're getting a factual representation of it all. So.
It's just charming and chatty, and I'm sure he wasn't quite as charming when he was writing political stuff about the Nazis.
Yeah.
But that said, the great dictator.
Yeah, tell me about the story. He wrote the original.
He wrote the original story. My mother typed it. He was very good friends with Chaplin. One of his earliest books, I think Iliana or Murdo or Iliana, which is gypsy stories. He was very associated with gypsy stories, but it's maybe a quarter of what he wrote. I mean, it became like a good branding thing. Yeah. Make him the gypsy guy.
He became known as the authority on
gypsies. Yeah. And also because he was flamboyant, and he wore capes, and he had long hair. And
do we get in trouble for saying gypsies? Or we're supposed to say Romani now? My family's Romanian also, so it's...
I did not know that.
Oh, my father was born in Bucharest in 37 or 38, depending on who he's lying to. Mom was England, Ukraine, Poland, all that. Just Jews from all over Eastern Europe. Yeah. But
got some of that too.
Yeah, that's. But Dad was
most of that.
38, or just about wartime Bucharest. So
my grandmother on the other side was Romanian. My father's mother was Romanian, and I think, and the father's family was like New England Protestant. I think somebody got written out of the. Yeah,
you assume there was somebody
got written out of the family Bible for marrying somebody Jewish kind of thing. Yeah. For marrying Rose. Yeah, but
you're saying about the gypsy heritage we got to from something else, or just from the correspondent work and being in Romania.
Well, at one point, supposedly they wanted him to become president of Romania, because nobody else spoke. He wrote that book, that Royal Lover, that was about the Romanian royal family.
Oh, we're talking about Chaplin. That's right. Yeah. Sorry, go on. Yeah. Somehow we got from Chaplin to the Romania thing. You're saying about Murdo, the...
The gypsy stories.
Yeah.
The grandpa was known for gypsy stories. I think Anne Wilde, who was the Cornell student who was majoring in grandpa pretty much, she had a theory that they didn't necessarily agree with, but she thought some of why grandpa's fame had gone away, because at the launch, too, people were, and the SUNY guy was saying, I don't really understand why he's not better known now. Yeah. He was so well known then, and he's so good, and there's so much work. What happened? And Anne actually, to a certain extent, thought that they created him as the other, the gypsy guy. And then when the 50s came along and House Un-American Activities Committee came along, being foreign was not a good thing. And when you look at the names of the people in his contemporaries, this whole lost generation crowd of Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Dreiser, you notice one thing in common about all those names versus Bercovici.
Yeah.
And I think there's an element of truth that they created him as a symbol of this and then didn't trust it. And he was not communist at all.
No, but it was,
at all.
It was something I've been wondering through, especially from your introduction and the way you frame, or the quotes you have about Conrad's stature back then, and then he'll be compared to Chekhov by future generations, and it's like,
it's true.
He's
Look
not,
it up.
and that's the thing. He's not now, and that's what I've been wondering: the nature of reputation and what happens, and that's a great theory for.
I think it's an interesting theory. Also, politically, he didn't align himself left or right. I mean, I was raised fairly liberal, progressive, but they saw through the bullshit.
Yeah. Anti-communist left. I just did a podcast about Orwell last week, and that's the same thing where it's the anti-communist left you,
and people misinterpret
on an island.
That is lined up with this, and it's like, no, it's not. And Grandpa was never called by House. I had a cousin who was blacklisted, one of the Bercovici crowd from the California Bercovicis, because Eric Bercovici, who did the original Shogun, and I think his father Leonardo Bercovici. Eric created Hawaii Five-0, I believe, or was one of the initial people and ended up living in Hawaii. And Leonardo was Portrait of Jenny and some really early, really wonderful movies. And ended up, I think the last thing he did was the remake of The Bishop's Wife with Whitney Houston. Yeah. I think Leonardo Bercovici was the director of that in his 80s. I think is the last piece of work that he did.
They got you out.
But Leonardo was blacklisted at one point. But Grandpa was not, and he didn't align himself with the left or the right, and I think that's a problem too, because at that period of time, New York, Hollywood, you put yourself with this crowd, and they were your allies and helped you in work and everything else. And there's a book, Tramp, by Joyce Milton about Chaplin, which she interviewed the family extensively, and she sort of got it right. That one of the problems was that Grandpa was criticizing Hitler, and Hitler and Russia were buddies at the time. And so they wanted that criticism to come from within, not from without. Yeah. And Grandpa was not part of the club who was allowed to criticize Hitler to that extent. But to backtrack on that, but Mom typed the treatment for
the
that.
Great Dictator.
And it was... He presented it in Pebble Beach to Chaplin with Melvin Douglas. Melvin Douglas was there at the time. And Melvin actually, in his autobiography, mentions that he was there, that Grandpa wrote The Great Dictator. And it was his first talkie, so it was a really important movie for him. And it's totally has the humor that's the family humor. It's Grandpa's humor. The kicking the balloon, that's the world. There's pictures of my brother when he was a baby kicking a balloon like that with the world on it. But
the alarm's going.
Security system, Cracker Jack security system. It's too much for Ruby. He's coming.
He's looking around.
It's probably a delivery. It's probably for me.
That's okay.
So that's my protein shakes. Grandpa dedicated one of his earliest books. I think it's Ileana or Murdo. I think it's Murdo. He dedicates it to Chaplin. Not like him handwriting dedication. It's printed on there, and it's a beautiful dedication about to those of us who serenade below the empty windows. It's a really beautiful, and shows how hi baby, Ruby has joined the party. He says, "Where are those cookies I heard so much about?" So it shows how publicly they were friends. I mean, Chaplin, my aunt was named Revolt on her birth certificate, with an E in the end to make it like a feminine revolt. And when the family story was on her 16th birthday, she demanded a new name. And Chaplin was there celebrating with her. They were in California. And she sort of barricaded the door and said, nobody leaves until I have a new name. And he came up with, hours into the night, he came up with Radha Bercovici, and she took the name and everybody was allowed to leave. So sort of in a weird way, her godfather.
Yeah.
But though he was brilliant and they were close, he was a son of a bitch.
Took ownership of...
He took ownership of not just that, he took ownership of songs. There was a lot of people used as control in Hollywood to kick people out. And it's in books. Joyce got a lot of it right about the politics of who was allowed to criticize Hitler. But they basically told Grandpa the studio would not let them. They could not make that movie for political reasons. And then he found out it was being filmed, which is a horrible betrayal.
Yeah.
I don't know how you get over something like that. And then it got put off in terms of, for years, it got put off for a lot of years, stalled off and stuff like that. And it was finally tried in Connecticut, and Lou Nizer was Grandpa's attorney. For that. It's in My Life in Court.
So he plays a significant role in the Algonquin.
Yeah. They were close. I think when I was going off to college, he signed those, recommendation papers for me or something like that. Yeah, well, he says such wonderful things about Grandpa, like on that back cover. That's pretty up there. Yeah.
So what were your memories of your grandfather?
Some of that is like what's in the intro to the book, but he had, which I did not include in there, but he had like a little hollowed out place in his chest that was like the right size for a child's head. Yeah. It sounds like a weird thing, but I remember being like curling up next to him, putting my head in the hollow area. It was like a specific spot that was for that. I remember they had a place in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and we would go there a lot in the summers. And I just remember strength. He was a big guy, kind of barrel-chested. He wasn't like hugely tall, but he was like sturdy. There was a sturdiness about him.
And family mythology? Was there a degree that your mother and her siblings kind of reflected grandfather's stories to you?
The patriarch.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was very much the center of the family, and I wonder. My mother ended up divorced from my father when I was 5, and my aunt ended up divorced. I wonder if he was such a strong male presence that nobody else was going to be able to measure up to that. My grandfather on the other side is in Wikipedia too. Leonard Dalton Abbott. He was a social anarchist, and not Antifa. Back when it was more like libertarian, I guess. He was a social anarchist, and I think he was. Who was it? Upton Sinclair, I think, is quoted as saying that Leonard Abbott taught him everything he knew about socialism. Something like that. Yeah, I think it may even be in Wikipedia. No. So I got it from both sides.
There's that sense. I mean, it almost feels like the movie The Royal Tenenbaums when you're sort of describing the artistic, the fact that everybody in the family
I love that movie.
Pursuing art.
Actually, I love that movie. Yeah. A little crazier than my family was.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a wonderful movie.
Yeah. But yeah, the sense that your grandparents really pushed the arts, or at least, like you said, let the kids sort of find themselves. I think
it's sort of what was the family business, sort of, But my mom told me when they in Free Acres in New Jersey, where which still exists, by the way, and they still have like stuff about mom and the family and stuff like that. When they used to go there, summers, Grandma had a little studio across the road, a little house across the road, and my mom remembered we brought her back there, and it was the place they'd been in, and she said, "Didn't there used to be a sleeping porch over there?" Which was unbelievable. She had not seen it in like 70 years, and they were like, "Yes, there was," and we walled it in. She totally remembered this, but she also told a story about how she would go over and talk to Grandma during the day while Grandma was painting, And Grandma didn't want to be disturbed. Like, nobody wants to be disturbed when they're working in the household. And she told Mom that you can't just come over here and just like talk to me. Mom was probably 7. You can't just come over here and talk to me. If you're coming over here, you're going to have to work. And Mom remembers the next day she came over to bother her again, and Grandma had set up a little easel and a little still life and a little thing for her to work. And it probably is the first painting Mom did. It was like, if you're coming here, you can't just bother me. I'm working. This is my studio. That's sacred space.
And that vibe comes through in the book, too. You have numerous scenes where, in particular, you have the writer losing his mind because there's another typewriter going on in the next room, and he's I feel that exact vibe that you're describing. Where it's, How did that trickle down to you? How do you feel the artistic DNA in the family?
I think there is. I think there really is. There is DNA. It's the nature nurture thing. I'm not sure. But some stuff just like comes. I mean, I think I haven't been doing that much photography lately, but I like photography, and I see it as the opposite of writing, because writing is a lot of editing involved, and photography I don't like to edit at all. I like to just catch it and it's done. I don't want to go in back in the day in the dark rooms. I don't want to fool around with Photoshop. I don't even want to recrop things rarely. I just want to caught it. And because it's of an opposite creative thing and not have after the moment inform it. I wanted to have just been in its moment. But I think, and I hate technical stuff, but I think what I bring to that is that I have an eye. I see the picture. I like going to demonstrations and I'll see exactly. It's almost like painful because I can't take every single picture, but I see the pictures. I see in street photography. I see where the pictures are, and I think that's from the time I was born. I saw things in rectangles on the wall, and they hung very Louvre style. There was a lot of paintings up. I would have arguments as an adult with my mother and take things down. Nobody can register any of this. That's too much. And then come back and they'd all be back up again. And those we have fights about hanging art, which most people don't like to fight about because it's not that important to most people. But I think it affected my visual sense because I was around things that were framed and composed from the time I could see. I saw her face and I saw paintings, and it's kind of like. It sort of makes sense. And verbally, I'm sure the stories that were read to me at night as a child were probably not just typical stories. They probably were like gypsy stories and things and stuff like that. So I would imagine a word sense would come from that. In fact, when I was in school, I remember this because it was kind of traumatic and it was not the right way to handle this. People at school would think, teachers and stuff would think that people at home were writing my stuff. There was a certain amount of, because they were aware that there was a lot of writers there. Grandpa was on recommended lists in high school still, So they were aware of that. And I was sometimes not even showing them the stuff because I was embarrassed that it wasn't on their level. And in something like 3rd grade in grammar school in New York, they put me in a classroom by myself, closed the door and told me to go write something, which is really like I thought at first I was being like punished. Yeah. Like, what did I do wrong? It's a horrible thing to do, actually, because I'm still talking about it, so obviously...
it imprinted itself.
I didn't have a lot of childhood traumas because, nobody hit anybody or yelled at anybody. But, and I remember noticing, I wish I had this thing that I wrote too. I remember noticing that it was a courtyard next to where the classroom was, and there was a plant in the window, and there was a plant in the window across the courtyard, and they were facing each other. And I wrote a piece about the unrequited love between the two plants across the courtyard. And they never...
questioned you again.
Yes, exactly.
It reminds me of the Keane paintings, those big eye paintings, and how they challenged the husband to paint them.
Though may really have been the wife who painted.
Yeah, it was the wife.
Did you see that movie?
Yeah. And the husband, oh, my back, I can't paint. That's. I
mean, they're questionable paintings.
Yeah, they're
I remember dating somebody in my way back when who said, Your eyes are like Keane painting, and I was back in the day when you were doing the dark circling stuff like that. Like, they're here. I think we can find them anyway. And he thought it was a compliment when he said that, and I was like, what?
Yeah. I think a little more artistic than that.
He thought he was saying something nice.
Yeah, well, we had Keane when I was growing up.
I didn't take it that way.
You were raised with a higher brow art.
Yes, exactly.
But what did art come to mean to you, both visual and pursuing the arts overall, whether it's, again, poetry, music, art, visual art.
Well, and more, because I was in drama class and acting class when I was a child, as well as in music classes. And I went to Juilliard for like piano, and I went to music and art in New York as a voice major. So it feels a little bit, and even does as an adult too. It feels a little bit like pick one, like you're putting yourself too thin, because you're sort of doing all of them. And should you just be doing one of them and concentrating on one of them more? And I sort of take turns on which, like I haven't been doing photography lately because I think I've been concentrating more on writing stuff. And I like screenwriting a lot, though I haven't sold anything yet, but I've won some festivals and had some really, we have a TV series right now that's making the rounds. It's gotten some very, very good notes, as the saying goes. They always want you to change something that's the opposite of what somebody...
One of my past authors told me off mic about the Netflix notes for his novel, where literally the central premise, everything that's central to it, if you just flip that, make it the exact opposite, we can go forward. And it's like you don't have a book or a project, then okay, you're cutting the check. But yeah, it can be a little weird.
We had a script that won a couple of festivals about greyhounds, called Fast Friends, about a little boy adopting a racing greyhound. And an agent wanted us to take everything out that was cruel to the dogs. The whole point
they need to be rescued.
They need to be rescued because greyhound racing is horrible. And I was part of the Grey 2K movement in Massachusetts to get it banned and all kinds of stuff, which it did. But it was like, well, then it's like
just a happy dog.
Beethoven or Benji or something. I mean, if it becomes like a boy adopts a greyhound from the track and lives with the dog, that wasn't the point. The point was he was going to a prep school. He had a scholarship. He pretended to be something other than he was. He was like an underdog, so was the dog. He raced with the dog at dawn around the track to get his soccer playing abilities up. It was a really sweet script. I mean, but they wanted to take that out of it. Yeah. The part of it that's what it's like. It's like if you did Free Willy and the whale was not in captivity.
Yeah.
Just a whale. Just a whale that you happened to meet while you were on a boating afternoon over the weekend. You know?
Just nuts.
Yeah, but yeah, Grandpa's the fame thing, and it does come up a lot because people look and go like, even Anne, when she was major, I don't understand how I don't know who this guy is. Yeah. How he was? Yeah, he brought Hemingway to his agent.
I will admit I didn't know his name.
No,
I got sent the pitch for the book, and I started reading. I'm like, this could all be made up, but I believe he's real. And then
you look up, and then you look up, and you realize
40 books and huge reputation, and nothing today.
Yeah. It doesn't, and he, I'm sure went along with the gypsy thing because he was not a stupid man. He knew this was good marketing.
Yeah.
He had like this image, and then at one point the image wasn't. They built up the image and then they didn't want him to have that image anymore.
But I mean, it dovetails with a sequence near the end of the book. The whole section on Valentino, Houdini, and Eleanor Wiley about not exactly fame or celebrity, but the aura, the thing, that weird charisma that the writing. He writes particularly harshly of Valentino in every single characteristic.
Doesn't he?
And yet he can't explain why the world came to a halt when Valentino died. Yeah.
He does not like that man.
Yeah. And yet credits him with something that
women go for. He describes him as a gigolo,
Yeah, and yet, the entire world just loses its mind for this man. Yeah. And again, brings up Houdini and Wiley also. They're in a more straightforwardly mystical context where they each had a...
And Houdini was milking it. It was part of it.
Yeah, as part of the spiel. I had a great show years ago. Oh, God, The Witch of Lime Street, about a nonfiction book about Houdini's fixation on disproving the afterlife in hopes that he was going to find some sort of proof. And how he and Arthur Conan Doyle were both straddling that world.
Interesting.
Again, from a negative perspective, trying to find something positive that would show that there is something after life. And this woman on Society Hill in Boston who was a medium, and Houdini's various attempts at disproving that she was what she was. But anyway, yeah, the notion of fame, reputation, and that aura, and how it dissipates or how it collects is
and how is I mean, he was more famous than they were.
Yeah, and yet, you know, we still use Valentino.
He brought
as a trope
Hemingway
today.
to live a right. You know, he said this guy's got something. You know.
Yeah, how much research did you have to do in terms of, like the end of the book is the short biographies, just a couple of lines on each of the figures he's citing, because so many of them clearly were very important people in 30s, 40s, 50s, and
you don't know who any of them are.
Yeah, and it's one of those you have to just sit there.
And there's a lot of them.
I know.
And I had to do that.
And it's not name dropping.
That was part of my edit. I was like, that's part of my editing thing.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why they gave it to you.
Yeah, it's like, now I know why. Yeah, that was endless. Yeah. Some of it was Wikipedia, some of it was just looking stuff up, and then some, you know, it was just finding what I could find, you know.
And there's so many of these figures, and the way he's writing of them, it sounds like they're household names, or at least New York household names. I think they were. And yet...
Depending on the household.
Yeah. You know, yeah, along those lines, tell me about your New York, and what this book kind of evoked for an earlier period for you. How did this book maybe change your ideas of New York?
I mean, I'm born and raised in Manhattan. It's like it's almost like pigeons. Look, no baby pigeons in New York. There are children in New York. People go like, really? In Manhattan? Because a lot of people will say New York and it's not. It's suburbs or somewhere, even a borough. But you know, Manhattan. You know, Manhattan child. End of the Universe. That famous New Yorker cartoon with the West Coast. And
I was reading a New York Post article a couple of weeks ago on some crosstown subway that was going to be blocked up. Crosstown is Brooklyn and Queens. I was like, what? I mean, yes, that's technically a crosstown subway, but it's not it literally doesn't touch Manhattan at any point. So let's not exactly call that crosstown.
No, so. Somebody who's not from the area, who's using the wrong terminology.
Yeah. But you were a Manhattan kid?
I was a Manhattan kid. When I was born, I don't remember. When I was born, I lived on Barrow Street, which I wish I'd kept that place. That was the first floor. And I remember walking past it with my mom one time, and there was like a dent in the glass stuff, and she said balls used to go through one of the reasons was balls used to go through the first floor window, and it was almost like that was still the dent from where that ball had been. And then what I remember, I lived on East 96th Street, but I don't really remember that much. I remember West 54th Street, which was a very theater district. I lived on West 54th for a long time, and the kids I went to school with there, PS 69, it's all public schools. This kid that went to school with, one of my best friends, her father was the musical director of like The Music Man and Most Happy Fella and all that kind of stuff. So we used to go to matinees and get to sit in the box if it wasn't occupied, and he would put the lights on us and stuff like that. We were so cool. Loved that. But I mean, I remember I studied violin in school. I was doing violin and guitar at the same time. At one point, I dropped guitar and stuck with violin. That was a mistake. Guitar was going to be much more useful in life then. Yeah. Starting violin at age 9, which is you're ancient already. You need to be playing violin when you're 3. You need to be one of those little itty bitty, little tiny,
the scaled ones.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I was always in special music classes. I was in drama classes. I was in, summers usually were spent in fairly concentrated performance arts kind of classes. Went to the museum a lot. Knew my way around the Metropolitan Museum for sure. Had knew the Fragonards in the East 70s, and I forget what the name of that. It's not a museum. It's a.
The Frick has a couple.
The Frick, yes.
Yeah, they have the Fragonards.
The Frick.
That I never dug them in the regular Frick location. They're temporarily over in the old Whitney site now. And when you take those Fragonards out of the pale blue,
the ornate
Frick,
place.
they actually resonate more.
Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah, now they're sort of free floating, and it's the Whitney, so everything is just dark around it because it's the old Whitney. But seeing it, I was like, oh. Well, these actually are good paintings, and I was just disgusted by the whole room they were in the other place.
Because the room reflected it was too much of its time. It was a time capsule.
But yeah, they're weirdly beautiful when you see them out of their context like that, in that more modern.
But also there was a lot of French orientation in my household growing up. A lot.
Yeah.
They spoke French in the house. See, Grandma dominated there too. They weren't speaking Romanian. They were speaking French. And there was French cheese. France was the best of the best of the best. They were very, very French, and the thought process, I think, was very French, kind of cerebral and politics and things and stuff like that. And that would make sense that Fragonard would resonate for a little girl who was raised in a French-oriented household. I mean, But my mom was a vegetarian. I am now, but she raised me and my brother eating meat because my father ate meat. She didn't want to be an us-them kind of situation. And I think Grandpa and Grandma went vegetarian for a while in France, but I'm not sure. I don't think he kept it. I think he was too much man's man.
I didn't want to say that, but that's exactly what I was thinking. The way you frame him is very...
robust.
Yeah.
So I think he slipped from that, but he'd raised the kids with that. And they, what do you call it? But we were raised eating meat, but nothing looked whole. It was like, there wasn't a turkey or a chicken or something like that. It was all ground up and stuff. So it was like not visibly that. What else about being raised in New York? I mean, I love New York. I think I haven't been back there in a few years now. When my mom was still alive, I would go back and stay with her, and she lived in West Beth for the last bunch of years.
Really?
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah.
I've always thought someone should do a series about West Beth and just do a different apartment every
Supposedly
week.
there's at least either there's been a documentary or someone's working on something now. I remember hearing, because it is just such a... I was there once to record with someone who was visiting his girlfriend.
It's amazing,
It was
right?
just this fantastic place. I'm like, I'd heard about this, but I never knew it was this wonderful arts apartment.
And it was a Bell Telephone Laboratory where they did the talkies, where they worked on the stuff for the talkies. It's perfect. But they had this false notion that people would just stay there for 5 years till their career got on its feet and they would leave. Nobody leaves.
Once you're in New York and you've got an apartment that's somewhat stable.
Yeah, you're not leaving. But Mom had a couple of it's got a really good gallery, really nice gallery. Mom had a couple of exhibits in there. My brother passed away. We did a memorial exhibit there. It was really cool. There's a theater there. I was there for a couple of Thanksgivings in which everybody gathered in one thing, and it was just people were singing, and it was just it was very.
We throw the Island of Misfit Toys Thanksgiving, and I'm just visualizing that sort of. Where
It
people,
sort of was.
Well, we don't have our families. Let's go with this artistic family instead.
But it was all actors and singers and visual artists and musicians. It was very cool. Yeah, it deserves a document, but more. It deserves like
you could dramatize
do a different
that
apartment
easily.
every week. And that's how you're structured. This is the building, and just go down. And there was a 95-year-old choreographer who lived there with bright red hair and stuff like that. It was cool as shit. And
Yeah, no, I can see it. That could be our pitch after this. We'll work on the screenplay. Or
Yes.
we'll work on treatment and get it rolling.
Yes.
Do you remember your first solo subway experience? Were you, in retrospect, way too young the first time your parents said you can go there on the subway on your own?
No, because we weren't really a subway household. We were more of a bus. The number 5 bus, because Riverside Drive and 72nd Street. The number 5 bus is this fabulous bus that goes down around Broadway and Lincoln Center, and then it goes all the way down Fifth Avenue. Even though it took longer, everybody most likely took the bus. Yeah. Much more than they grew out there a lot.
Yeah.
I think I started taking the subway occasionally, high school age, but I don't think there was much subway. My father took the subway.
Gotcha. Yeah, I wasn't sure, because there's always the stories of, I was 6 years old and my parents let me take the subway to school and all this.
But I walked to school, which was maybe 7 or 8 blocks when I was
some independence.
8. I wouldn't today. I wouldn't. Maybe that's a misconception of things getting worse, and maybe it hasn't gotten that much worse. But
it depends on the neighborhood.
Yeah.
A lot of weed. Everywhere I go in New York is a lot of weed.
Well, that's actually okay.
Yeah,
it's the other ones.
Yeah, it just gets.
It's more okay. But
the smell of it can just kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it, but it'd be nice to. We don't smell cigarette smoke anymore.
Yeah.
So.
It makes people a little more mellow, though.
I'm fine with everybody just
mellow
chilling the hell
good.
out. Yeah. With the book, did it get you sort of thinking about that whole round table concept, that whole sense of artists coming together of all different stripes and not making art, making conversation instead? What did you get from editing the book, I suppose? What did it bring you in terms of that sense of, wow, yeah, artists could do this once upon a time?
Well, in some ways, I thought of it as sort of being the influencers of their day, but more significant as influencers, not like the kind of crappy influencer
people
things they
doing
have.
duck lips and taking pictures.
Yeah, exactly. And finding, the best way to open a jar, or something. Not that I haven't looked at those. How do you open up those gelatos? You turn it upside down. But in some ways, on a much higher level, they were influencers. And ideally placed influencers, since they were journalists, a lot of them. So anything they said was going to automatically go out to the masses. But at the book launch, Kevin Fitzgerald, who, I don't know if do you know Kevin Fitzgerald? No. He's the founder of the Dorothy Parker Society, and he's actually written 8 books about New York. It's an interesting guy. He loved the book, and he was genuflecting that I had taken this to a place and gotten it published, because he understood how difficult it was to make that happen. But in this case, it happened pretty easily.
Yeah, he doesn't have to know how easy it was, but yeah.
But he had all of his Dorothy Parker Society people buying the book and just loving it.
And the book doesn't lean on Parker too much. Everybody thinks Algonquin, and the first name that comes up is Dorothy Parker, and she figures in a little bit.
But it doesn't go with it doesn't tread where everybody else's tread, which is kind of why it's interesting. But what he said, it's the first book in 70 years that could do this, and there will never be another book that can, because everybody else connected with that era is gone.
Yeah.
And unless somebody else happens to find a book, but then it would happen to be as well written.
Right.
And it's just not going to happen. So he's like, this is it. This is basically the book to satisfy the people who were in this era. And people love that era. You're saying that's why Gatsby keeps doing. There's another Gatsby going on Broadway and another Gatsby music. And that's kind of what it is. People like this period of time. And you're not going to find other stuff from that time. But it isn't that way today, because I'm sure back then they didn't think it was perfect.
Well, that's the funny thing, that, I'm sure in the moment they knew it was great, but I don't think anybody was in the moment thinking this is an iconic situation that we're in, as opposed to, let's go out to the Algonquin, see what's going on, just hang out with the guys and not pontificate exactly, but, talk. And
chew the fat.
Yeah, that's good. What do you think accounts for that interest that you were saying, the way people are still fascinated in this?
I think maybe it's a desire for stuff with more substance to it. Because I think what's in the medium today and what the writing and everything else, it's like people raised on television don't necessarily write as well as people raised on books. I think there's a nostalgia for a period of time in which there was a superior intellect involved. There were people doing something new, not necessarily recreating another Marvel comic book hero. It's not my era, and it's not my book really, but so I can only speak from the outside of it. But they just had more substance to them. They were just better at what they did. And maybe, it's funny to say this because they sort of are a committee, that decisions aren't being made as a committee back then, but they aren't. Someone's writing a book. It's not like being templated.
Yeah. There wasn't a commission to do this. It was just...
So it is. They sort of are a committee, but they're not. Their own individual work isn't being done as a committee, which is sort of different. And they just found, like Grandpa says in the atmosphere section, they just found each other. There was a thing that they needed to be around, and they were just more alive when they were around these people than when they were. I found the whole thing in the book about people not wanting their room to be changed and coming back to the same place. Yeah. I just love that, sneaking the chairs in.
Yeah.
Gradually
doing changes and
sneaking
upgrading
the cat, the new cat in.
Yeah.
I just thought that's superstitious thing of it. This is the room where I wrote this, and maybe I have this fabulous mansion by now with this great study in it, but I'm going to go to my little room with the shabby chairs and the burn marks in it, and that's why I want it to look. I want it to be the same, because that's my magic lucky spot. So
there was a section in the book where Peter Altenberg and the Vienna Cafe guys come up, and it was I hadn't made the connection explicitly, but realized, oh yeah, this was Vienna for New York, and because it's America, it's capitalism centered. Like so much of what Conrad's writing about is the act of making a living in the arts. It's not just how great the conversation was, but there's so much of this is suffused with what it took to get paid, what this guy or that guy's percentage was, and how he managed to get a play to hit.
And they're borrowing money from each other.
And it hit me. I'm like, oh, this is just like Vienna, except it's American capitalist style, and they have to hustle in a sense.
I thought when he talked about how actors' equity and things like that were actually sort of founded in their own way. They might have happened anyway if the Algonquin didn't exist, but at the same time, everybody was there.
It was a catalyst.
And so it was a catalyst for them to discuss it with each other and see each other's problems and say, we got to do something about it. And I think, his discussion of writers' pay, I thought that was so much with the writers' strike. Yeah. I was like, it's still a problem. It's still the same thing as 70 years ago. But he's talking about things that are just so totally true, like today, in terms of being taken advantage of.
At the very beginning of it, where, again, it's a very different tone at the beginning, where he's sort of talking about those labor in the arts, issues.
He wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, and it's real important, and it sets a tone for everything, because you're getting, again, as wonderful as these people are, they weren't there free.
Yeah.
They had to work, and even when you
some of these wonderful people were making nothing.
Yeah.
Like when he's talking about Edgar Allan Poe or Dreiser or people like that with these huge hits, and they're still not, huge books and stories and stuff, and they're not.
Yeah,
they're still working.
The translators were making more money than they were from the books.
Yeah, and they're still working like day jobs, doing like manual labor and stuff like that. Yeah. I thought that was very. I said, especially with the strikes, it seemed like a very. The more things change, the more they say the same type territory. Yeah.
So this being your first, we'll say exploration in prose, do you have the bug? Are you looking at long form prose for yourself, or again, you mentioned adapting some of his work.
There's at least two other books of his. One is a novel about gentrifying Greenwich Village in the 50s. Brings it up a little closer. Yeah. And it's these twin sisters. One is an artist and one is a poet, and it's about selling out or not selling out, and it's sort of superimposed with this other story that the poet's sister wants to write about France in World War II, and the church has been bombed, and the woman's daughter becomes a hooker, basically, to raise money to rebuild the church, which the church kind of knows and takes the money.
Yeah,
it's an interesting overlaid story, but it's also about selling out and what you sell out for and what's okay, and that's overlaid. It's almost like French Lieutenant's Woman. It's got a story on top of a story, kind of thing, and so that's one we're looking at to do a mini series of. And then there's the memoir stories I talked about earlier with Chaplin and Einstein and Mahler and about 20 different people to get out there. But one of the things I'm thinking about is, which would involve their work, which is that there is a story in the granddaughter discovering the grandfather's work in an old trunk. It wasn't this trunk. It's actually the
I was hoping we could see it upstairs.
It's actually in the bedroom. It's the furniture with the mosaic thing in the front. The trunk plays better for stage. That somebody inherits it and they're going through it. And as they're going through it and they're reading and stuff, they hear the voice of the person who wrote it. Mm-hmm. So they're backlit and they come up on the stage. And because in that trunk, I didn't just find Grandpa stuff. My aunt was a really wonderful writer, and she left me a musical about the Moulin Rouge at that era that she wrote with Martin Kalmanoff, who was quite a well-known composer of the time. And that's never been performed. So, and my mother's poetry, my grandmother's poetry, because everybody who painted did also write. Yeah. And so I see this as potentially being a show called A Legacy, in which somebody takes the trunk out and they're going through the stuff and they're hearing in their voice, and then it transposes into the person's voice who wrote it one at a time. And all of a sudden these characters are all on the stage who are all these relatives, and they start potentially interacting with each other. Like, is that supposed to be me in that poem? Excuse me? Is that really the way you saw me? And she finds the musical, so then an act of the musical gets performed. And I see it interesting potential of the work because there's so much work. Every few months you could change the show, have them reading different things. There's so much for them to read. It could be a different poem, it could be a different story, it could be a different scene from the musical. And I'm trying to shape this into what the whole story is, and if the story is also about the legacy, which is great in some ways, but then you don't necessarily do your own work.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
Between that and the pressure just of growing up in this family with this degree of artistic achievement, what that was like for you, and whether this looks like a sort of fulfillment of that as we work on this project.
It's a mix. I mean, obviously I'm not going to bitch about growing up in an atmosphere in which, nobody ever hit anybody, nobody ever yelled at anybody. No. And this was a very supportive in which, whatever you wanted to do, you got to do. But at the same time, like I was saying when I was writing stuff and I wasn't showing it to them.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of, it wasn't that they would criticize me, but if I got 98 on a test, there was in my head, did somebody get 100? There was sort of an awareness of that, and in school it definitely was an awareness of the family stuff in terms of them questioning whether I did it, in terms of when they would read out marks and stuff, they would say, Mirana Abbott, of course. If I did well on something, they would say, of course, or as to be expected, or not a surprise, as if I didn't really do any work to do that. It just sort of happens. So that entered into it. I feel most at home with people who are in the arts and don't totally understand business people. So I haven't strayed that far from.
Although you've had a day job that sort of.
Well, it's advertising, but I write.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to interact. I mean, I did trade magazines for 25 years and then became a lobbyist, which is even stranger. But
I haven't seen anybody else in my family who was. My father was a professor, but he taught English and public speaking.
Yeah, so
at City College. So
arts adjacent.
Yeah, exactly. So I haven't really been around that much. It isn't civilians.
Non-combatants.
Yeah, exactly.
So it wasn't a sense of I hate to use the term pressure, but that sense of having to live up to the family thing, or just you were free to be,
I think I went through periods of time in my life in which I didn't talk about the family at all.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be my own separate person. I didn't say anything about it. And there were moments in school and stuff like that when them being, and they weren't like eccentrics or anything like that. But I remember my mom had this little pair of leopard gloves that I hated because nobody else wore. Then it became cool.
Yeah.
She was punk. Feels it. But and I would ask her not to wear them. And of course she would. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. So I remember, and Grandpa had longer hair. That was before my boyfriends had longer hair. That was before that, and so that was a little like they weren't exactly like everybody else. And my mother would make kind of weird. They weren't eccentric. This wasn't horrible, but she'd make kind of like unusual lunches. It'd be a halva sandwich or something like that.
Imagine two boys raised in suburban New Jersey in the 1970s named Gil and Boaz. Again, when your parents are not from here...
Was it really Boaz?
My brother's name is Boaz. Mine was supposed to be either Hiram, because of a Masonic thing, or Joachim. Gil, as it turns out...
You got
I came off okay. Of the three, I think that was the best I could have ended up with. But yeah.
But of course, Mirana's my mother made my name up.
Yeah. When parents are from...
It's Mirel, Rada, and Naomi.
Oh, really? That's we do have that Jewish tradition of doing those little combo names.
Yeah. So mine's a combo.
Yeah. Your favorite of Conrad's books, besides the Algonquin Roundtable, which is obviously the greatest book he's ever done.
I actually don't think it is. Yeah.
But what's your fave?
I haven't read them all.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if there's one that you recommend, if there's any.
Forest Song is really nice, about Australian opera singer. I think I like the China Closet, the new one that we're working on. I don't think I have a favorite.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I do dive into his work where I should start, but I'll.
There is Main Entrance is nice.
Yeah.
Main Entrance is kind of cool because he wrote because it's got nothing to do with gypsy. Main entrance is about, it's one of these sprawling family things. And main entrance starts with a store that's being sold by people, and the small thing in the middle of the block refuses to sell their store. And they build a store around it. And on opening day, the little store in the middle puts up a sign, main entrance.
Yeah, still, you still see those in
which
New
is
York.
fabulous.
Yeah, you still see those in the city where there's always those ones where they built like an entire hospital
But
complex, and there's this one little spot that's still
main
right
entrance,
there.
and everybody's going in that way. They're going. They're going to be doing very well.
Last question, which you've listened to some of the shows, so you know this is coming. What have you been reading?
I didn't know that was coming.
Last book you read that you read today?
But I finished a book. I just got a book. I'm not that much of a I was a total reader as a child, but I got this book, which I'm going to show. Because I ordered a book recently because I decided I'm joining the book world.
Yeah, you're now an editor.
I'm really bad about reading lots of little pieces of things online and political things. And
That's again a big part of our lives at this point.
I started
The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger. Or Schlanger. I'm going to go with Schlanger.
I saw a little blurb on it, and I started reading. It's fascinating that plants actually do these nervous system-y kind of things, that there are plants that make false pollen to attract the bees, and there's really not that much pollen there, but it's because they want the bee to come there. Yeah. So then, and there are other ones that at a certain point produce chemicals to kill the bugs because there's going to be too many bugs on it, too many larvae, so they're all clinging to it. So it becomes like, is there volition involved in this, and what is volition?
Yeah.
That plants have this whole little world of their nervous systems doing things and causing things and having activities that are what we think of as animal and human, but plants are doing some of this stuff too. Of course, there'll be nothing left for me to eat, but that's we can't go too far down that road.
You figure we go on a long enough timeline, they're going to eat you at the end, so it's okay. They just have a different different sense of time than we do, I guess.
So that's what I will be reading.
Yeah, understood. Along with working on the memoir book, so
yes,
which I after exploring the Algonquin Roundtable and just reveling in his prose, I'm so looking forward to anything else that you guys print.
I mean, that one is ready to rock. I mean, that's the one I sent out as a proposal, and I don't want to name the agent.
No.
Though he's a big one. He started reading that stuff and he said, "My God, he can write," And I thought that was the one that was going to go first, and it's totally ready to go.
I will come back when that one comes out too. I will come right back up to Massachusetts and sit down with you.
I found an interesting Hitler one that may go into that, which sounds kind of strange. I found an interesting Hitler, but Grandpa was, well, first of all, Grandpa's his it's the gypsy in me. Well, I guess you have to change it. It's the Roma in me. It's the gypsy.
I know. It's a different time, but
it's the gypsy in me. The last thing in that, and that's. My mom called that sort of a potboiler that the publishing house wanted him to write. She didn't consider it to be one of his best written things, but there's so many interesting people and stories in there. It's a Tolstoy on page 3. So he had a whole thing like in there about that. At the very end of the book, he says there's only one thing in his life he regrets, and at this point, it's 1939 or 1940 that he was in the Sports Palace when Hitler was doing one of his early speeches, and he regrets not having brought a gun with him. And knowing Grandpa, if he had, he would have killed him. And he wouldn't care what it did to him. Because he understood where that was going and what that was. He got it immediately. When other people were like, they won't think of me as Jewish, they'll think of me as German. No.
Oh, and you just got that anecdote in this too about
that is not what's going to happen.
The was it the pianist who doesn't have a drop of Jewish blood in him?
Wasn't that a great story?
A remarkable hemorrhage where he loses all of his Jewish blood.
Wasn't that a great story? Oh, I hope you'll do better. What do you mean?
Yeah.
I thought that was a great story.
It's a fantastic book. And again, I'm looking forward to seeing more of Conrad's work, going back and finding some of the older books in there are used bookstores around. We're near Boston.
They're not that hard to find because he was so popular. There were a lot of books. These were not rare books when they came out. They were
popular.
He wrote for the masses. He did not like the word intellectual at all. He hated it. He basically wrote for people to read it the same way as you do as a journalist. He was not writing esoteric. He worked stuff in, Like in the beginning of the book, when he works the whole stuff about the Bible and the labor and the thing and the years before, he works his knowledge in there.
Yeah, but tells it well.
Tells it well.
No, you've opened a world to me with this book, so I'm awfully happy.
I'm so glad too, because there's so much more.
I'm looking forward to it. But Mirana, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate the time, and like I say, I hope to get back up here for another round sometime.
Okay.
And that was Mirana Comstock. Go get the Algonquin Roundtable, 25 Years with the Legends Who Lunch by Conrad Bercovici, edited and with an introduction by Mirana Comstock. That's from Excelsior Editions at SUNY Press. Now, Mirana's not on social media, which, as we all know, is a good thing, but you should check out ConradBercovici.com to learn more about her grandfather and his amazing life and career. I don't know if I got across how good his prose is, but it's phenomenal. It reminds me of some of my favorite nonfiction writers and journalists, like Ron Rosenbaum particularly. Anyway, go to ConradBercovici.com. That's KonradBercovici.com. Just like it sounds. I will have a link to that in the show and episode notes for this one, along with a link to the Algonquin Roundtable. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast comes out every week with really interesting conversations with fascinating people. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, or who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or comic or piece of music or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. You can do that by email, groth18@gmail.com, by letter or postcard. I put my mailing address at the bottom of the newsletter I send out twice a week, so if you're on that list, you can get my address there and write me. Or by DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky, or by using my Google Voice number. That's 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So go longer than that, you'll get cut off. Just call back and leave another message. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with listeners, but I'd never run something like that without the speaker's permission. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. I mean, this whole ReaderCon weekend where I recorded with Mirana, as well as 2 weeks from now's guest, Jess Rulifson, and one of October's guests, Sven Berkerts. That ran me some money, but that's why I work for a living. I've got a decently paying job. If you've got money, you can make a difference in somebody else's life. You can give to individuals through like GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, and all those different crowdfunding sort of platforms where you'll find people who need help making rent or medical bills or vet bills, car payments, getting an artistic project rolling. There's all sorts of things that people could use a couple of bucks and it might make a real change in their lives. So, try and give. Now, I also give to institutions in need. I give to my local food bank every month, as well as World Central Kitchen. I make occasional targeted election contributions. I give to Freedom Funds, Planned Parenthood. There are a lot of different funds out there that you can give to try to help make a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.